Well, hello and a very warm welcome back to Talk Norwich City. It's Jack Reeve joined alongside the PinkUn's Connor Southwell once again. We were filming, I think about a week ago, maybe just over a week ago, ahead of your long trip up north to Sheffield, Connor, and we described it as a period which could be make or break for Liam Manning. It was break, certainly no making up ground in the last few weeks. It's been probably an inevitable outcome for a head coach that broke all the records for all the wrong reasons. It's been a saddening start to the season for Norwich.
Yeah, it's about time we got something right on these videos, isn't it? I think since the start of the season. I think that's an apt way to sum it up. It's probably the way I felt over the last 48 hours or so. It's probably a sadness, really, because if you think about the optimism and excitement there was in the summer, the fact that obviously the narrative was set, Norfolk boy, kind of not a homecoming, but it felt a little bit like that. Someone who understood the club and the fabric of it and the people that support it, and for it to have ended in 158 days and for him to be the shortest serving permanent Norwich City boss with the sort of lowest win percentage, highest loss percentage, all of those numbers, and the fact really it probably felt like it went on longer than maybe it should have done, even in spite of those numbers. It's been a disaster, hasn't it? I think for everyone involved, which is such a shame because, as you said, as we've said, I think Liam is a really good bloke, and I know people are a bit sick and tired of hearing that, but I think that is important because I think we all like to see good people succeed irrespective of where they are, but obviously especially at this football club. And I think you could see on Saturday in his post-match the pain in his eyes. He looked absolutely crushed, I thought, in terms of where they were at and how it had gone. And yeah, as ever in this sport, it's the king is dead, long live the king, isn't it? And it all moves on very quickly to who and what next for Norwich City, which is such an interesting big question, and I'm absolutely fascinated to see how they go about answering that in the days and weeks ahead.
And the difficult thing, Connor, is I'm really consciously trying to not rewrite history and what my thoughts were when we hired Liam Manning, because I was excited. I was excited about the potential of what he'd done at Bristol City. I like the local boy element, and I don't think he actually played into that enough. And I know that yourself and Paddy were talking about like wherever he goes next. I think the critical thing is to try and get a bit more of his personality across. You knew Liam far better than most. That I recall you saying multiple times that he was very different off camera to what he was on camera, which is natural, but to the extent in which I think he was, that maybe wasn't healthy and meant that relationship with the Norwich fans was never as deep as it could have been. But when I think back to my excitement, and I think a fair proportion of Norwich fans' excitement in the summer to what the potential could be, how did it go so wrong? Because as you've said, probably more than most, like, this guy's a good coach. You don't become a bad coach overnight, and that's difficult to say when no one's seen him pick up a point at Carrow Road. But there is something in there. Obviously, there is. So how did this go so disastrously?
Yeah, I mean, on the personality point, I completely agree. I think there's a little bit of an issue probably with the modern breed of coaches. Interestingly, I was speaking to someone who used to coach me, who's obviously been a manager now abroad and coaches abroad still. And he was talking to me about the UEFA Pro license course, and actually how there's a whole section on how you deal with the media. And a lot of that is about shutting down questions and being quite straight-laced and maybe not giving them headlines and whatnot. And I just think that's a real shame that is kind of the education that young coaches are getting these days, that they're kind of suppressing their emotions, because actually it's such an important, powerful tool. I mean, if we go back to Johannes, he was really good at it, but equally I think it kind of bought him a lot more time as a result of that. And I wish that wasn't the case. I wish they were kind of told, yes, of course, you have to be careful what you say, you have to be mindful, but actually if you use it in the right way, it can be such a powerful tool, and ultimately it's the way to communicate with fans. So I hope Liam does reflect on that, and there is a little bit more of him, because, like you say, I think the Manning we saw off camera was very different and had a very good sense of humour, and I think we saw probably a lot more of those leadership elements than perhaps we did when the camera switched on. That's natural. You're very different off camera. I'm very different off camera. Everyone is, but I think it would just be nice to see a little bit more kind of warmth stuff. But not everyone is comfortable in front of that. In terms of how it went wrong, blimey, I mean, where do we start really? I think I'd kind of echo what everyone said. I don't think Norwich City have kind of solved all their issues by sacking Liam Manning. It doesn't start and stop there for me in terms of where it's been. I think probably his two main regrets, if I was going to kind of think and speak for him, which you can't really do. I'm sure maybe one day he will speak about this. I think pre-season was big. The way it was structured probably didn't allow him to get his ideas across. It wasn't structured in the way that he wanted to. He was very clear on that. And then, of course, the recruitment, I think with hindsight, and it is a wonderful tool, I think maybe instead of him being presented 5 players and choosing maybe the one that he would prefer, I think actually what he would do probably with hindsight is saying, actually, I want this guy. I know he can perform. I know he can deliver. I know he understands my style of play. I think those two aspects are maybe the regrets he will have. In terms of how it went so wrong, I think identity was a big point. I don't think we ever really knew what a Liam Manning team was, what it looked like, what it was trying to do. I did so many, as you guys do, opposition fans, opposition kind of colleagues for myself, get in contact. Oh, how are Norwich going to play? What are they going to look like this weekend? And it was really difficult to answer that question, which is a shame, really, but indicative probably of the broader issues. I think there is some variance involved. I don't think he probably quite got the luck, but even then, if he did, Norwich would probably have 6 to 9 more points and they'd be about 20th in the league as opposed to 23rd. So again, it wasn't solely all on that. I think ultimately it just came down to he didn't get enough of a tune out of this squad. And ultimately, it would only have been a managerial change where we will find out the true capabilities of this squad. Is it as bad as people have said it is? Well, we're going to see when the next head coach comes in and takes it. So yeah, identity, I think recruitment, player development, I don't think enough players took enough of a stride forward. All of that being said, I think the mitigation that is now kind of well out there is fair in terms of how good is this group of players? What were the tools he was given? And I think probably the levels of expectation that were heaped on him were too much, if I'm being honest, and not by him, not by fans, but by those in and around him. And by setting that very binary, it's got to be top 6. Didn't leave him a lot of room for manoeuvre. Not to say this would have been good enough anyway, but I think it maybe they could have bought him a little bit more time if the messaging had been different.
It feels overwhelming though, Colin, doesn't it? Because, we can speak about head coach, we can speak about is the squad good enough, but ultimately we're in a position now where whether it was Daniel Farke, Dean Smith, David Wagner, Johannes Torup, Liam Manning, like all good coaches with good CVs outside of Norwich City that haven't been able to get a tune out of this club. Ultimately, it feels bigger than this squad, but this club. And, we've still got Ben Napple here. We've still got the same board structure here. Like, obviously, one would assume that you would see a natural kind of bounce from a new head coach, but are we going to be in the same position come the summer where we're going, not sure whoever the new head coach is has got a massive tune out of it? Do we need to find an alternative? Like, at some point, this chopping and changing needs to stop because we all know it's not sustainable from a financial level and a progress level. So it feels like something bigger needs to change. But what that is, who knows?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, naturally, and you see it in modern football, the head coaches are the fall guys always. That's where kind of the thing or the fingers get pointed because it's the easiest thing to change and the quickest thing to change. It can have the most immediate impact. And you look at the debate. I know there's quite a few Norwich fans who will be watching this. And look, maybe there are some who are watching this that don't want this to be the case. But there are, I'm sure, a population of Norwich fans, however big that constituency, that would like the sporting director to leave. But of course, how impactful is that in the short term? There's an argument to say that's not very impactful at all, and maybe that's something that you do outside of a season. And I can understand that argument totally. So in that way, if you want to change something and you want to make impact quickly, which is what Norwich City need where they are right now, it was always going to be the head coach. It was always going to have to start with Liam Manning. The question is now whether it starts and stops there. But you're right. I mean, the last 4 head coaches post Farke, the average tenure has been 11 months. They haven't even done a year, a lot of these guys. Johannes Torup didn't do a year. David Wagner did. Dean Smith did a year and a month, but obviously some of that was Premier League overhang, not in terms of Championship. If you condensed it purely to Championship, the tenures are even shorter. So I think Gary O'Neill, and I'm sure we'll reference his name a little bit later, but he was on national television a few weeks ago and made a really good point. And I wrote a column around some of these quotes in terms of actually maybe we're too quick to look at a head coach when everything goes wrong. And like you said, I think we're too quick. Liam Manning now to Norwich City fans will be regarded as a poor coach, as a bad coach because of the job that he's done here. But actually, you can be a good coach and do a bad job somewhere because of the context and the structure that you're in, and particularly in the structure that Norwich operate in, with a sporting director, with an executive director, where the sort of sporting side of the business and the non-football side of the business are very split. They're very defined. They're very clear. I think ultimately the head coach is a product of that. If you think about 18-19, yes, it was Daniel Farke's brilliance in terms of the way he set that team up to play, the way that the identity that they had, the momentum, the confidence, all of those good coaching aspects that team had. But that was underpinned by really savvy recruitment. It was underpinned by clear philosophy, by academy players coming through and supplementing what they were trying to do. It was a sporting structure that was like a conveyor belt, like a machine, and it was well oiled. It moved as one, and the figures within that then were pivotal. And equally, the reverse of that is true. When you have a sporting operation that isn't particularly well defined, that struggles a little bit to know kind of where it's going and what it is, then you can have Pep Guardiola in there as head coach. The machine won't work in the same way if we're to continue that analogy. So I think there's some truth in what Gary O'Neill said in terms of actually maybe the head coach isn't the most important person in this structure, because the idea of it is meant to be more collaborative. So that then puts you in a real predicament where the head coach is always the fall guy, but actually is changing the head coach that impactful if that strategy isn't clearly defined for you to fall back on. That's probably the big sort of existential crisis that Norwich find themselves in at the moment. And I think in short order, when a new head coach comes in, we will get an idea of that. But my fear is, because of the way that Norwich City operate and have operated over the last number of years, is that in 4, 5, 6 months, irrespective of who the new person is, we're going to be here again. And that ultimately is the cycle that they need to break, rather than the constant chop and changing of head coaches.
And it's an existential crisis, Connor, that at this stage Ben Napper will be facing. Liam Manning was the third head coach in which he's sacked. It was Wagner, then Johannes, and then Liam Manning. He's taken a club that had finished in the playoffs under David Wagner, and granted there was some talented players in there, but at this stage leaves us basically bottom of the championship if you disregard the happenings at Sheffield Wednesday. Do you see the club giving Ben Napper more chances to get this right? I know that you've reported that Mark Attanasio might have a slightly more hands-on approach with the appointment of the next head coach. Who knows if that's a good thing, coming from a man that has said he doesn't know a huge amount about football. I'm sure he's got advisors alongside, but listening to fan sentiment, being in the ground like you are every week, it was actually the name of Ben Napper getting the most criticism, not Liam Manning. And I think most people agreed that Liam Manning needed to go as well. But how many more chances does Napper get? Otherwise, are we going to be in the same position like we just said in the summer, where we're going, oh my goodness, we're now in League One. This head coach wasn't right. Where do we go now?
Yeah, look, I think that's a totally fair criticism. And again, if you look at the way that Mark Attanasio has run the Milwaukee Brewers over a long period of time, it's in a very similar structure. And he's given the people in those roles in his baseball team, which is all we can kind of compare it to, really, in terms of what his ownership style is and what he tries to do, is he's gone for continuity. He values that stability. He allows people to make mistakes. And I think there is a powerful element to that, because you've got a guy who is the sporting director for the first time. He's only going to learn through making mistakes, but at the same token, as you say, that cannot be infinite. You cannot make an infinite amount of mistakes and continue to lose money and continue to regress down the league. I think this one is huge for him, not just in terms of where Norwich City are at, but I actually think for the context probably of his own career. If you get two wrong is pretty bad going. If you get 3 wrong, I think he's going to really struggle in terms of forget Norwich. I think the future and wanting to be a sporting director, be it here or somewhere else. So I think Attanasio's role is less probably about identifying candidates and less about playing a frontline role. I think it's more, what I hope it to be, is a little bit more challenge and a little bit more question marks. Why are you doing this? What about this person? What about this in your process? Have you thought about doing that? I think all of those elements could be really useful, because I think what gets overlooked about sporting directors generally is that it's a really kind of lonely role. If you think about it, you've got ownership kind of on one level of the tier, and then there's a big jump really to exec level. And it's about, where does that challenge come from? Who does Ben Napper have to bounce ideas off of. I know there's kind of external data guys that I'm sure will be helping out as well that the club have used. So you just hope that that quality of advice, that quality of challenge is there, not just around this head coach search, but in general, because again, to now be on kind of your third head coach after you'd identified one that you gave a 3-year contract to and kind of sold as a 3-year plan where you got rid of him after a year, then you pivot to someone who's a bit more proven, a bit more experienced, championship ready, so to speak. He's gone after 158 days. Where do you go next? What does that look like? How do you sell that to a fan base that, as you say, are increasingly disgruntled and have kind of lost confidence in what you're trying to do? I think all of those are very, very big questions for Ben Napper to try and solve. Equally, if you can bring someone in who wins a few games, I'm not saying that solves everything because it definitely doesn't, but equally the good feeling, as we know, can return very quickly in football, even if people are still disgruntled towards you. So look, it's a huge responsibility. I hope the support network is strong in terms of around this head coach search and making sure that challenge and that scrutiny and that collaboration is there probably as well. And that's the hope that not just Mark Attanasio, but some of those analysis guys will hopefully do. And that is where I think this becomes so interesting, because the two candidates that he's gone for previously have been very different. Does he go different again? Does he kind of stick with where his head was at with Liam Manning? I think that is the huge question that he has on his hands, because, as he said in that statement, this isn't just about a managerial hire. This is also about trying to repair a club that at the moment feels and looks from the outside looking in fundamentally broken.
Yeah, let's talk about the three kind of front runners that have come to light since the sacking of Liam Manning. They're Russell Martin, Gary O'Neill, and Will Still. It feels as if we've just jumped back to kind of July again, and we're talking about who our next head coach is going to be, because I think at that stage all three of those names were also in the spotlight. Of course, the image of where they are at in their career and where Norwich City has changed somewhat too. What do you make of those three names? I mean, you know, they all have their various benefits and also negatives. I mean, particularly with Russ Martin and Will Still, they feel slightly more project managers, and whether they're the ones to get a team out of a relegation scrap, which is exactly what we are, is yet to be seen. Obviously, Will Still sacked by Southampton, Russ Martin by Rangers. Gary O'Neill feels slightly more pragmatic, but I don't really know what that means in the modern day. Where's your head at, and how do you see the next sort of week and a half playing out? Because by the sounds of it, they're looking to make a permanent appointment by the time we play Birmingham on the return of the international break.
Yeah, that's definitely the hope before next weekend. I think there probably is a situation where if they had to wait a little bit beyond that, they would be willing to do that for the right candidate if they were to emerge. But I think the expectation is that this should hopefully all be done and dusted pretty quickly, because obviously where they're at, they don't really have that time now to waste games and to not have whoever it is in the dugout pretty quickly, especially before what would be post Birmingham. They've got a Carrow Road doubleheader against Oxford and QPR. I think you'd want the new man in charge for both of those, just in terms of the atmosphere and to lift the place for those games. In terms of the three guys you mentioned, very interesting in terms of we're familiar with all of them. That's not always the case with these Norwich City searches. And hey, look, it might not be the case come the end of it, whoever emerges, but it does feel for me with that timeline more likely, but not necessarily definitively, somebody who is out of work, because obviously you can move quicker on those. Gary O'Neill is clearly somebody who they like internally, have liked internally for a long time as a coach. He was one of the three shortlisted in the summer, along with Liam Manning, who obviously went on to get the job and was their preferred candidate, and Pep Lijnders, who has ended up as Pep Guardiola's number 2 at Manchester City. So they've done a lot of work on him previously. They've spoken to him previously. That would feel like a relatively easy one to kind of pick up and move with. I think he's a really interesting one, because you look at the jobs that he did in first years at Wolves and at Bournemouth, and hard to disagree, he did a good job at either of those. You look at the data, it's not great behind either of those clubs, with, of course, the context that they were struggling in the Premier League at the time. So that, for me, is the biggest question mark. I'm not really sure what Gary O'Neill is as a coach. What would he come into Norwich and try and do and try and play? Because both of his teams have been quite counter-attacking. They haven't necessarily had the best defensive data. They haven't had the best attacking data. And again, he's been firefighting at the bottom of the Premier League. So I don't think we really have that clear definition with Gary O'Neill. But what he is I think really warm, really galvanising as a figure. Certainly in that initial period at Wolves and Bournemouth, he galvanised both of those. I think second year at Wolves, maybe less so when you look at some of his public comments and the relationships he had higher up. I think came under a little bit more scrutiny for that. But he probably ticks the box in terms of what it feels like it needs, which is someone to come in and really grab this and energize it and galvanize not just the team on the pitch and inject some confidence in them, but also a fan base and a club, and to bring a fan base with them. And then you pivot to Russell Martin, who, well, nobody needs to sort of question whether that man has any definition. You know what he would come in and try and do, and the way he would try and play the structure. If you actually, I know he kind of gets a bad rep, and I'll confess I'm quite a fan of him as a coach. I recognise that it's become quite binary around Russ, and I accept that and I get that. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but actually I think you kind of look at the job that he did at Swansea, where as I understand it, they had kind of a bottom third budget, and he got them to kind of mid-table comfortably, and was then able to get the Southampton job. He got a team out of the Championship, which I don't think should be sniffed at, irrespective of whether you think that was an achievement or an underachievement or an overachievement, and still sort of masterminded that against the Leeds team that got 90 plus points. So I think the job he did at Southampton was good. Rangers clearly was a disaster from the off, but let's be honest, if that had gone well, he wouldn't be in this conversation right now. For me, the major question mark for him is he somebody who can come in mid-season and quickly implement a style of play with very limited training time? You look at, for example, and this is a high-profile example, but Ange Postecoglou at Nottingham Forest, where he tried to drastically overhaul a style of play, and it went very, very badly very quickly and got toxic very quickly, and he lasted 7 games. So that would be for me the question around Russ. But again, I think he would tick the box of personality. I think he's able to kind of sell a narrative. I think he would probably be quite unifying in terms of bringing people together. Obviously, I recognise he's quite divisive at this moment in time in terms of the type of coach he is, but also there are some sections of the Norwich fans who just didn't take to him towards the end with the exit and whatnot, but clearly would understand what the club is and hopefully how to move it forward. And then, Will Still, another one that Norwich spoke to, I think, in the Johannes Off-Torp cycle, and was at Colney and got shown round, and clearly a coach that Ben Napper likes and rates. And I know a lot has been said in terms of the Southampton tenure, but equally you look at the underlying numbers there, which again, I know some people hate, but you look at them and they were towards the top end of the Championship. And as ever with these things, when that is the case, you kind of wait to see if one or two things happens, whether you catch up with the data or whether the data catches up with the performances. And in the end, I think for the final 4 or 5 games of that tenure, they kind of caught up in terms of the confidence dipping. He is, like you say, more pragmatic, more adaptive, probably in this kind of modern breed of coach that sets teams up in a less identifiable way, but in a more kind of adaptable, pragmatic, unpredictable way, where they have lots of different skill sets and tools, which is kind of where they were going with Liam Manning. So you can kind of you can see where the pieces would fit together there. I'm not necessarily sure he has maybe that galvanizing personality that would be needed. So 3 very interesting candidates, all very different. They tick different boxes. Where Norwich are at, I think it's going to be very difficult to get a candidate that ticks all of them. But I think it's very interesting that those 3 names have emerged, and we'll see if any others do in the meantime. So it's interesting that that's where this search has kind of started at this moment.
And it feels an interesting time in Norwich history, Connor, because I guess you can go one or two ways. You can go for a firefighter who you don't see as anything more than a 6-month kind of interim coach to just try and find survival this season, because ultimately, whether the club say it or not, surely the sole aim now is to just remain in the Championship. But then you're again back to square one, and maybe then do you use the summer as a proper root and branch change opportunity, or do you try and get that right now? And with the nagging thought in my mind with Russ and Will Still, who I both really enjoy watching and hearing from, and I think they're really capable head coaches, is like, is this the right situation to come into? Because they've got who knows what that squad is capable of. I think it's maybe less capable than we first imagined, but there are some talented players in there. You've got the fan situation, you've got the new ownership, you've got the difficulty surrounding people at board level. So you're not walking into a nice, calm environment, are you? And I just wonder, like, is that what they want at this stage? Because they will be knowing as well that they can't have too many more sackings or bad things happen, because that's tarnishing their career. So it's a tough one. It's a really tough one to kind of call this next appointment.
Yeah, it is for the reasons you outlined. I mean, look, the noises we've heard is that they're not searching for for want of a better person, a Neil Warnock type who's just going to come in till the end of the season, keep them up and go on their merry way and ride off into the sunset. They want someone who, yeah, of course, absolutely needs to do that. That's imperative for obvious reasons, but also somebody who can, in the short or medium to long term, can continue with this strategy of what they're trying to do in terms of developing players, upsell, and people can laugh at that if they wish, but that's still the idea and the plan of the path that they're on. So I think it's got to be, in short, someone that can kind of do both of those things. And I think the luxury, I say luxury, it's not really a luxury, but the position that they're in now, we're not in February, March, where you've got 13 games and you need 15 points, and it is purely about just getting, almost like a kind of T20 game in the final overs, just about trying to knock those runs off. It's not that at this stage. They have 31 games, so many points still to play for, whereby if somebody could come in and could implement a style of play and could get them going, then they could progress up the league table pretty quickly. I mean, you go back to this time last year, I think Frank Lampard had just walked in at Coventry. He replaced Mark Robbins, and he wasn't someone that we would regard really as a firefighter. And clearly that has gone very well. So I think they've still got enough time on the clock where we're probably not at, blimey, we need to pick up the phone and give Neil Warnock a call and try and tempt him out of retirement. I don't think we're there yet. And equally, yeah, like you say, I think it's probably at the moment about combining the two. And that's where this is so interesting. Ultimately, whoever they get in, and any managerial appointment generally is going to be a huge risk. But I think there needs to be as well some acknowledgement of where they are, that probably not going to arrive at the kind of perfect candidate who's going to please everyone. And that's very rarely the case anyway, but particularly with where they are in the division. So, and for as much as we can talk about mid to long term, we're also talking about a football club, as I said, where the last 4 coaches have had a tenure of 11 months. So I think whoever it is, irrespective of the situation, but especially now, just needs to come in and try and win some football matches, because that's in the short term what this club desperately needs at this moment in time.
Yeah, and just finally, you mentioned earlier, I think it's key to note that mood can change quickly in both directions, and it feels like a distant memory now, but for that kind of 10 minutes or so that Norwich led against Leicester, and Leicester fans felt like that the club in crisis at that point, Carrow Road was bouncing. It was loud. There was a real kind of unified support, and I just hope that whoever comes in next, as much as the football that they play, have an ability to rally a fan base, because when harnessed correctly, this fan base is seriously powerful at this level. And I don't think Manning did that enough. And I think that's such a key skill. It's what Daniel Farker had. It's what Alex Neil had. It's what Lambert had in the glory days. Like, whatever that takes, and it's different for each person. I hope that whether it's Russ or Gary O'Neill or Will Still, like, they can get that out of this fan base, because it's there and it's waiting to be unlocked. And we want to be cheerful. We want to be happy, because it's been a long while since we felt that. So hopefully they can find that. And as you said earlier, I think that's a skill that's gone missing in the modern management era. It's so obsessed with data, which is important, and tactical tweaks and perfect setups. And actually the messiness and the emotion of it all has kind of been lost, and actually the most successful teams have that in abundance. So we shall see. It's going to be an interesting time. You can follow it all on the PinkUn. This coverage and the access that those guys get is absolutely superb. has Paddy made up with Liam Manning yet after his being told to respect him? I quite enjoyed that.
Oh, I don't think you realised. I was in the room and I didn't realise it had happened really until I was kind of a couple of hours later when I saw kind of the backlash. So yeah, I mean he's fine. He's had a lot worse than that over the years. So yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about Pad.
Good
But
stuff.
you know, if you're gonna shoot at him, you can't miss, can you? I think that's the lesson that we've learned here.
Do not annoy Paddy Davitt, otherwise your job will be over. Thanks very much for watching, everyone. Check out the Pink and check out Connor's stuff and his personals as well. And hopefully the next update we have will be a positive one. Bye, everyone. Cheers.